Okay, it's 8 a.m. I think we're going to get started. Welcome, everybody. This is the last day of our ARC Smart Cities Forum, but I like to think we saved the best content for last here today, and especially in our first session here today, which is on smart city platforms. Again, my name is Larry O'Brien. I'm Vice President of Research at ARC Advisory Group. I'm on the OT level cybersecurity team and also obviously the smart cities team at ARC. I primarily follow smart city platforms, which is what we're here to talk about today. For those of you that aren't familiar with what smart city platforms are, these are basically a system of systems that have the capability to integrate data from multiple silos and sources within a city to provide a single source of visualization and operations and so forth. So you really get a holistic view of all of what's happening in your city to make intelligent decisions about how to improve people's lives and improve city operations and improve efficiency and so forth. And we're going to be talking about a lot of those things here today. We have some great presenters and some great panelists. I would like to just take a quick moment to introduce our panelists and presenters. One of them is not here because he is in Australia and hopefully he'll join us for the panel discussion, but I think it's about 1 a.m. in Australia now, so we'll see. But his name is Tibor Schwartz. He is a senior advisor for QIC Global Infrastructure, and that QIC stands for Queensland Investment Corporation. Tibor joined QIC Global Infrastructure in early 2017, and he currently manages 19 direct assets with $15 billion worth of funds under management. So that's a pretty significant amount of assets. His focus is on supporting the active core asset management strategy, driving sustainable improvement in operations, technology, and process innovation, assessment, and selective adoption of emerging technologies across the investment portfolio. Tibor has 30 years of experience from leading fund managers, ICT, and management consulting, including QIC, Telstra, Ericsson, Vodafone, NBN, Partners in Performance, and serving clients in North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific across a range of industries. He co-funded and led the digital practice serving clients in transport, energy, and utilities, telecoms, ICT, and agriculture. Our next speaker today is going to be Amber Kohlberg. Amber is a management analyst. Hello, Amber, at the City of Columbus. Amber has 5 years of financial management accounting work experience. She has been working for the City of Columbus since 2019 in the Parking Services Division. Amber's area of expertise is financial and data-driven analysis to inform company decisions, and I'm sure she's going to be talking a lot about that during her presentation today. We also have Anthony Veri. Morning, Anthony. He's Director of Smart Cities and Wireless Mobility for a company called Integrated Network Concepts. Anthony has over 18 years of experience in communications and IT. His last 5 years have been focusing on smart technology, wireless networks, and cybersecurity, which we'll also talk about today. Having a Lean Six Sigma black belt, he leverages lean and continuous improvement methodologies to drive smart decision-making, new efficiencies, and reduce defects and waste. Anthony is vendor agnostic, which opens the doors for the best solution planning and design when it comes to smart cities and smart buildings. His relationships and training with tech giants, SMBs, and startups gives him a vast knowledge of leading in future technology. We also have two distinguished panelists joining us today. We have Robert Hylton, who is the co-founder and COO of Transpara. Morning, Robert. Robert is a technology industry entrepreneur, and executive with over 25 years of experience in the software industry. Transpara is the third company with the same management team, including one that was sold to Rockwell and the other to OSI Soft, which I think most of us are familiar with. Additionally, Robert spent 10 years at Microsoft, which I also think most of us are familiar with, where he led global product marketing and sales teams. At Transpara, he's responsible for sales, marketing, and commercial activities in addition to his active role as a user experience design of the software. And last but not least, we have Matt Willenbrink, who is the Chief Commercial Officer of Fybr. Good morning, Matt. Matt has over 25 years of experience positioning technology for success with broad experience in strategy, business development, marketing, product management, and digital development. Matt uses a systems approach to consistently deliver results, and throughout his career, he has worked with multinational clients such as Microsoft, Kraft Foods, American Express, and Monsanto. In addition to early adopters of emergent and disruptive technologies, all with a proven track record of creating an enhanced market presence and company growth. He's also an author and presenter on subjects encompassing IoT, smart cities, business transformation, digital strategy, and technology trends. So once again, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items. We are going to go through our three end user presentations, starting with Tibor and then Amber and then Anthony. And then once we're done with that, we're going to move into an open panel discussion, which will last for around 30 minutes. Of course, I do have questions for the panel, but if you would like to answer your own questions, we definitely encourage you to do so. And that will be in the Q&A section at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. We also have a chat function, which you're welcome to use, but as far as questions for the panel, I just want to reiterate, we will be looking at that Q&A box to answer those questions. So please feel free to enter those. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, and we are going to run Tibor Schwartz's presentation from QIC. So Alan, I think you can take it away and run that presentation.
Hello, my name is Tibor Schwartz, and I'm joining you from Sydney. I'm with Queensland Investment Corporation in a role of Senior Advisor, Asset Management. I would like to share with you a presentation about our perspective about smart cities. This is a perspective from an investor. What I will cover in my presentation is introduce QIC, talk about the global trends that underpin our thinking about smart cities, and think about some of the drivers that lead to infrastructure development. I will then touch on Port of Melbourne, one of our key assets and the largest container port in Australia, and follow this with conclusions. Queensland Investment Corporation has been around for almost 30 years, and it currently has almost 90 billion Australian dollars under management across a number of different investment types. This includes infrastructure, which I'm a part of. We currently have over 100 clients from North America, Europe, Asia, and Australia, and our organization has almost 1,000 professionals that are located globally. In terms of global infrastructure, this is a part of the team where I work. We have currently 19 direct investments that fall into transport, energy utilities, and public and private partnerships categories. These assets include major ports, airports, tollways. In terms of energy and utilities, we have one of the largest portfolios renewable energy generation in Australia. We have assets in renewable and distributed energy also in North America. And we have some investments also in water utilities, gas storage, gas distribution, and electricity distribution. It's a diversified portfolio across North America, Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. We have returned very good results to our investors, and therefore our portfolio is continually growing. In my team, we have close to 100 people located in 5 offices globally. What is really core to our philosophy is active asset management, and use of technology and adoption of key technologies to manage assets in the context of infrastructure are very important to how we operate. I would like to touch on trends that we consider as mega trends, the most important trend that underpin everything to do with infrastructure. Some of these are also very directly relevant to smart cities. I will focus on this presentation on digital and digitization, because these are the trends that are very strongly also relevant to cities. When we think about the key underlying trends for cities, in the past, there has been already a very strong trend of urbanization, but in the past, urbanization was more about being quite a reactive approach that is looking to provide the basic services in cities. But as cities are continually evolving, urbanization is also maturing. And the model of urbanization that we think of, it's very much about proactive planning and being ahead of the demand curve. And hence, this is something that will further attract people to cities. And there will be an increasing pressure to also use smart asset management and planning to ensure that these growing cities are going to be good places for people to live at. And this is something that really what should underpin all city planning is the focus on the quality of life and why we're delivering these new services. QIC is thinking about all infrastructure investments in a customer-led framework, and we really try to engage with a broad set of stakeholders. And in the context of smart cities, the most important, of course, are citizens, and that will be using the services that organizations such as us will enable. We need to manage these investments across long life cycles and through economic cycles, and have very much an eye on sustainability and on really managing the risks and opportunities that will arise over this long term that we are involved with these assets. We think very a lot also about what are the adaptation strategies with respect to changing climate. Where technology plays a major role is that relevant technologies can improve how we manage assets, how we plan for the future, and we should be thinking about all relevant technologies and adopting them appropriately. When we do adopt technologies, we also need to be very cognizant of additional risks, and specifically with cybersecurity, increasing digitization will also lead to some extra risks that we may introduce, and we are very strongly thinking about these areas and ensuring that our assets are very competent in how they manage increased exposure to cyber risk. Lastly, on this slide, as infrastructure requires ongoing investment, we also think about what are the most appropriate models for a long-term sustainable infrastructure investment. Getting back to the question of technology, if we think about what is the operating system for one of these major infrastructure assets, it starts with a notion of an integrated smart asset management system. And this system would consist from a number of blocks. First of all, it is about having appropriate sensors and appropriate ways to collect the data from quite a range of different endpoints. This data needs to be appropriately transmitted and collected into databases and organized into data sets. And only once we can cleanse these data sets and organize them appropriately, we can develop some real insights about how to make better management decisions day to day and how to make better long-term planning decisions as well. So when we think about this system overall, there is many aspects to it, but the starting point is that for every organization, for every smart city, every asset, there is already a range of data sets that exist today, and organizing them and using them efficiently is really, it is a very important starting point. What I would like to share with you now is one such example from one of our largest assets from Port of Melbourne. The Port of Melbourne is the largest container port in Australia, and every single day, and there is on average close to 10,000 containers that are being handled by the port. This important commercial gateway is the largest enabler of trade for Australia, with close to $100 billion annually, and that is transacted through this port. What we are doing in terms of digitization is for the functions and roles that we are playing in this port, we are thinking about how to make the data visible and how to expose it to the right audiences in real time. And in this example, I would like to show you how we manage navigational aids, which are used by the port and to ensure the safe passage of vessels in and out of the port. In this case, we are using Visual KPI software platform, which is helping to provide the real-time visibility and ensure that we can proactively manage these assets, and ensuring that we learn about the condition of each asset well in time to go and do some proactive maintenance or replacement as required. Let me play this short video now.
The Port of Melbourne's using data-driven decisions to improve the management of its assets. A good example of this is the port's cathodic protection systems, which provide protection to approximately $1 billion worth of wharf assets. We can keep track of the systems in real time from the office without having to use more costly site-based inspections. So we can use these to identify faults in the system and also predict potential faults before they're going to occur. We can look at the data, look at the trends, relationships, and through machine learning, help predict responses in the future. There's approximately 230 navigation aids in total within the port. The navigation aids are critical pieces of infrastructure. They're used to ensure the safe passage of vessels in and out of the port and facilitate about $100 billion worth of trade. Using real-time monitoring, we can better prolong the life of the navigation aids and also minimize reactive works. Enable us to be more proactive in the management of our assets. For our users and tenants, it means that we're going to be able to better prioritize and plan our works so that we can minimize disruptions to operations. Improved data will enable us to take a more risk-based approach and better justify future investment decisions. It means that we can manage our assets more effectively and achieve greater returns for our investments. We have a really great team, and having a great team is really important to achieving success.
I would like to conclude with making some remarks about what are the most important things we do with respect to thinking about the infrastructure in the context of smart cities and further development. First of all, we think that there is a significant and growing pool of capital that will be finding investment into infrastructure. This is something that we have been involved in for 14 years and will continue being so. It's very important that these investments are done with a view that is a long-term development approach, as there will be a growing need to improve the quality of each asset. Secondly, urbanization is very strongly correlated with this required significant investment in infrastructure, and we are positioning ourselves to be able to support cities and infrastructure operators by making appropriate investments around the world. Thirdly, we think that it is very important that customer-focused approach is right at the center of how we may think about developing each infrastructure asset that we are involved with, and that we keep checking if our view is current, because as we are involved with these assets over long periods of time, these views change and the needs of cities change, and we need to make sure that we understand our stakeholders very well. And the last point I would like to make is that using appropriate technologies, and both existing and emerging technologies, is very important to ensure that we are very much responsible stewards, and that we are operating these assets as safely and as efficiently as possible. And for this, we need to be thinking about the range of technologies that exist today, but also technologies that are emerging. And lastly, also related to this point, for making good decisions in the context of operating assets and for smart cities, it's very important that decision-making is strongly data-enabled. And for this, I really emphasize that the starting points should be is to utilize all data sets that already exist, and over a period of time, have a technology roadmap that will be adding new data sets and new technologies and new sensors that will make this data set richer. But it is a long-term process, and the starting point is very much about utilizing the data that already exists today. Lastly, what brings all these points together is that we believe that by being effective infrastructure asset managers, we will be able to deliver infrastructure and operate infrastructure that ultimately improves the quality of life. And I think that this is a common goal that is connecting all of us. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Tibor. That was a very good presentation. And hopefully Tibor will be joining us for the panel discussion. I would like to just say a couple of words, because I think ports are an excellent example for application of smart city platforms. There's a wide range of assets there, from the very old to the new. There's a lot of, ripe opportunity for digitalization there. And I think we're going to talk more about that later. If Tibor doesn't make it, we have Robert Hylton of Transpara, who can talk a little bit about what they're doing there. So welcome, Amber. We're going to move on to your presentation next. And I think Matt also has a few words to say up front. So Matt, I'll invite you to join us too. And then when you're done with your portion, we will transition over to Amber. So I will now hand it over to you. Oh, Matt, I believe you're on mute.
That's probably a little better.
Very good. You sound great now. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Can everyone see my screen here?
Yes, we can.
Great. So let me go back a couple slides. So, with smart cities, we're going to see the world population, rapidly expand to 9.8 billion people by the year 2050. And of that population, approximately 2/3 are going to live in urban areas. So what we're going to see is, as those populations increase, how urban infrastructure evolves is going to be one of the critically key contributing factors to what is the quality of life for the citizens living in those areas as we move forward. And there's a few verticals that we at Fybr, in our 20+ years of experience have seen as the kind of the main buckets where we see smart city infrastructure really becoming prevalent. Obviously, parking has been around for a long time. Transportation is somewhat of an offshoot of that. And in particular, in the last few years, we've seen curbside management as one of the the new areas related to transportation and parking that cities are finding critical to and keen to want to monitor as they move forward. Water and flood monitoring, intelligent lighting, and environmental monitoring. So of those, the parking, transportation, and lighting are typically areas where cities see that they can reduce cost and maximize their return. And in some of the other areas like flood monitoring, they can help reduce risk within the communities to create a better quality of life for the citizens living there. So how do you move forward with a smart city infrastructure? Most cities we've found have looked to the low-hanging fruit, which typically has been parking and lighting, or transportation data and lighting. And a couple of years ago, and Amber's going to speak to this in a minute, we partnered with Columbus, Ohio for a smart sensor project, where we were one of 3 vendors chosen to come in, and they evaluated our system. We installed 114 sensors and 82 metered parking spaces. We put in sensors into bus stops, areas where they were having trouble with people either parking or doing deliveries, or vehicles standing in the loading and unloading zones for the buses. We did a couple loading zones as well for commercial loading zones, and we provided an air quality sensor for them to evaluate as well. In those metered spaces, within our first month of deployment, we saw over 25,000 sessions, which equated to about 34,000 hours of occupancy. That was at about 76% occupancy, and the average duration was about, just under an hour, and there was about a 3.5-minute gap between those parking sessions. In the bus stops, as I mentioned before, we place sensors, in these 100-foot bus zones, 6 feet apart, so that as buses pulled into those zones, we could track where they were exactly within those loading zones. We could also identify if there were vehicles that were not buses parked in those zones. And then, with that data, the city could then, utilize better enforcement, or find better policies and procedures to better mitigate and make a safer loading and unloading zone for those buses. A little bit of information on those zones. We saw that obviously 4 to 7 a.m. were some of the least active hours. The sessions commonly began increasing at 7 a.m. and built up frequency until 4 p.m. Between the hours of 4 and 8 p.m. they decrease again, and then we saw the most activity in those zones between 8 p.m. and 12 a.m., which and Amber, you can probably speak to this. That's probably not when the buses were typically loading and unloading. So that was probably one of the identifying factors, and one of their goals was to see if there were people that were using those zones for uses other than buses. We also found some anomalies, where we could determine factors that were things, predict when vehicles other than buses were utilizing those zones and what types of activity was going on. And with that data, the city could then better manage those zones. And then I'm going to hand over to Amber to talk about some of the more interesting things that, since this pilot occurred shortly before the pandemic took place, and then was continued and extended through the early days of COVID. How this parking data was used by the city during that time created some new and interesting challenges for the city, and provided them some interesting insights that they could use to better create some policies and plans moving forward. So Amber, you want to take over?
Yep, sure thing. Thank you.
No problem.
If you want to go ahead and click to the next slide, I will get going. So what I'm going to talk to you guys about today is how we were using our sensors during COVID times. So we definitely have been using our sensors ever since we took off with our pilot, and we've been using the data nonstop. But with a big change like COVID, where we didn't have any data, we had no direction on what to do, just like everyone else around the world, it was nice to have the sensor data to help us kind of navigate some areas that we were having issues in. So in Ohio in particular, when COVID hit, we had carry out dining. It was open the whole time. So to help out our restaurants with turnover in front of their businesses, we had some requests to look at what was going to be the best way to get parking freed up in front of restaurants. So since our sensors that we had in the short north area of Columbus, we had tested them, we knew they were very accurate. So we were able to look at our sensors in our session timing for loading zones and 30-minute meters to see what would give our restaurants the best turnover rate. So we did our evaluation in March and April, and we were able to see that even though businesses thought that loading zones were going to be the best option for them, that 30-minute meters were actually going to be better to help get cars out of the way so new people could pull in. So we actually took that data and we were able to temporarily across the city uninstall some of our 3-hour meters and put 30-minute meters in to help facilitate that turnover. And then we also were denying requests for loading zones when those came in, knowing that a 30-minute meter may have a 20-minute parking session, whereas the loading zones would have a 45-minute parking session. So we also used our sensor data to look at occupancy on a daily basis when COVID had first hit. So we were using the sensors to look at behavior and how that compared to previous pre-COVID times. And we wanted to try and get a good trend analysis going to see where our revenue was going. So we knew that typically 10% of our revenue would be less than what our parking sessions were. So about 10% of people weren't paying. So because when we look at our revenue data, it comes in typically over 2 days before we had a clear picture, but our sensor data was up to date within a few minutes. So we were able to look at our sensor data to see like, okay, we're getting a little bit more money today, probably we're getting less, we're still seeing downward trends. So it was very useful to have sensor data to predict where we were going financially. Matt, if you want to click to the next slide for me. So another area where we were able to use our sensors is enforcement. So we never ceased enforcement for parking during COVID times, which some cities did choose to stop. But we did have to be very mindful on where we were using our resources. So we had some limitations on allowing people into buildings, shift turnover, all the kind of stuff that everyone was experiencing. So we had to be very particular on where we were using our enforcement. We might have had less staff available. So we used our sensor data to tell us where our busiest times of the day are in areas. So the graph below is showing our loading zones and the number of sessions that we had for those. So we could see where it would be a little bit busier. So the 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. time slot is probably where we would want to send our enforcement officers if we're looking at enforcing loading zones. We know that maybe 3 to 7 p.m. is where we need to focus officers when we're looking at meters. So we were able to kind of use our resources, essentially saving us some money, sending people where it would be best to be enforced to help make sure people are parking appropriately. So we would also look at our occupancy data and compare that to payment data. So that would tell us if people were parking and not paying, where that was happening, when that was happening. And that was another way we could send our staff to take care of areas that might have been of concern. So the sensors were definitely great for putting our resources where we needed them and to making sure that we were helping out businesses the best way we possibly could. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Amber. So I think we've seen two really good examples of smart city platforms, one on the big extreme side of things with container ports and so forth, and billions of dollars worth of investments all the way down to parking enforcement in the city of Columbus. My wife and I are former residents of the Columbus area, and we spend a fair amount of time in the short north. So I would hate to see what that looks like with everybody getting takeout from the short north all at the same time. It must have been quite a challenging problem to manage parking there. So last but not least, I would like to pass the baton over to Anthony Veri. He also has a very good presentation prepared on what I believe is kind of the overall landscape of the smart city platform market and why do we need them and what the value is. So I'm going to hand it over to Anthony now. And you can take it away, Anthony, and you're on mute too. So there we go.
Okay, great. I'll start here in 1 second. We'll get this fired up. Okay, you should be able to see my screen now and hear me. Again, my name is Anthony Veri. I'm with Integrated Network Concepts.
Anthony, I can't see your screen. I'm sorry. There we go.
Okay, there we go.
Excellent. Thanks.
Okay, sorry about that. Again, my name is Anthony Veri with Integrated Network Concepts. I'm Director of Smart Cities, Smart Buildings, and IoT, and I'll be giving a short presentation here on smart city platforms, on what they're needed for, some of the architectures and use cases. I use this picture a lot just to show that there's a lot of data in cities to begin with. But also this picture shows a lot of moving parts. So that means the data isn't static. There's a lot of data that's always in flux and moving continuously. So that just shows that data collection is key and paramount to understanding how your city operates and where there can be issues and when the issues can arise. So when we talk about smart city platforms, I try to go through some common questions that I get asked over the years. And one is always related to what is a smart city platform? And truly, it's a software platform that you always hear operates on a single pane of glass, but it displays various types of data from various sources and different protocols, different languages. It should be able to consume data from just about any source. So when you see smart city solutions, if it's smart street lighting or smart sensors for outdoor air quality, smart meters for water and electricity, a lot of these platforms will have their own software that will show and represent this data, and you could manage those devices and sensors within that platform. When we're talking about a smart city platform, this is omniscient of the whole city, regardless what technology is deployed. It doesn't even have to be smart technology. A smart city platform should be able to digest data, even if it's just from standard software that you use in offices throughout the departments within a city. And then we hear a lot about IoT platforms. So how does a smart city platform differ from an IoT platform? An IoT platform's main focus is collecting and displaying IoT data from diverse sources. And the IoT platform can be an entity on its own. It doesn't even have to manufacture IoT hardware or sensors. There are some platforms that focus on just consuming the data and representing that data, analyzing the data, sorting and filtering, and showing that on a dashboard. Secondly, the other part is when they sell IoT solutions with sensors and gateways, they show this information and data, but a smart city platform can then take that data from that platform and represent that and holistically show it across all departments. But a smart city platform is also, it's crucial to understand who needs to see what part of any data or any information that's being collected, and making sure you set up the right authorization levels and verify who's signing on and when. And dashboards will look different depending on what department you're in and what information is important for your department or for your role. Later, I'll get into more about the differences between open source and proprietary solutions that are on the market when it comes to smart city platforms. We hear about open source. Open source is always great. You understand that it's free, but there's a lot more to understand before you actually invest. Even though it's free, you still are investing your time, development, and other resources. So I'll get into that in a few other slides here in a minute. So here, I'm just showing you a few snapshots of what some dashboards may look like when you're operating within a smart city platform. Every department, as I mentioned, has different information that they either have to monitor or maintain, or that they have to understand what's happening in a particular area of the city or within their department. So the dashboards and the visualizations on charts and graphs and meters on a dashboard that you'll see are vastly different. There's not just one dashboard that everybody gets because there's just so much data out there. So here you see a few graphs, one showing some street lights and some streets within a city, shows a satellite imaging. Obviously, you could zoom in on that. Others have incident reports. Some focus in on energy, and others focus in on building. A lot of city-owned buildings as far as their energy consumption, indoor air quality, outdoor air quality. And then obviously everybody is always interested on savings. So when you talk about smart city platforms, how much are you investing on this platform, and what will be the return on your investment? This is another topic I'll get into here very shortly. So now we're here looking at open source versus proprietary smart city platforms. Obviously, I said the big benefit is open source is free. You could add and change anything to the open source platform, and you'll get easier community buy-in when they know that you're not paying their hard-earned tax dollars on something that they might not see a benefit immediately with. But some of the cons that are important to understand when you're looking at open source is that it might not be as secure. Out of the box, it might not even be as stable. So you might have issues where you can't get access to it, or if you do have a problem or an issue with it, the support there isn't as robust as with a proprietary smart city platform. A lot of times you might have to go on a forum or a discussion or blog site to find out what others have done, or ones that are developing on the open source platform, and see if they can help with any issue that may arise. So just because it's free doesn't always mean that it doesn't cost anything. Time is money, and if you're spending a lot of time trying to get it to work or to customize it to absorb and consume the data within your city, there is a cost to that. And obviously the last bullet point says, yes, it can be more time sensitive. And then with the proprietary solutions, you get a lot of capabilities right out of the box. You get robust built-in reporting and graphing engines. So this does simplify once you have it integrated into your network, that these things work basically almost out of the box once you have the data sets coming in. A lot of the companies that I've dealt with and smart city platforms that I've used have great support and training. Some have better training and support than others, but Overall, I've seen very good training and support from the proprietary solutions that I've encountered. Now, obviously, there's an expense, and obviously, it's more costly than looking at open source, but the expense is a given with any proprietary solution. Some of them, though, because they are proprietary, are difficult to modify and change to meet the needs of your department or your team that is tasked with collecting, analyzing certain data. So if you can't, you might not have the ability to change and customize some things in that smart city platform that you paid for, and you might have to call them and pay an additional expense for more customization. So just be aware of that. Some of the limitations might not be initially disclosed up front. When proprietary solutions are being sold, they always like to highlight all the pros and maybe not all the cons that other previous customers encountered. And that will happen almost with any solution that you buy, not just smart city platforms. So it's always good to investigate, try to find out more information on how they compare with other solutions. You could always reach out to smart city experts like myself. There's plenty of other people out there that are doing similar things that have information on smart city platforms. So don't be afraid to ask. Now, there are a lot of challenges when we're talking about smart city platforms. When you're looking to invest, how do you tell the difference between vendor A, B, and C? The marketing will always tell you that they're the best. So it's always hard to understand which one has benefits or functionality or features that you're interested in that could be of benefit to your city and to your citizens. And that's the other focus. Look for what's best for your needs. Don't always just be sold on the marketing or the one that has all the bells and whistles. They're very expansive, and there's a lot that a smart city platform can do. And right out of the box, you're not going to use probably even half the capabilities that a smart city platform actually offers. So how do you determine your return on investment when you're spending money on a smart city platform? There's a lot of things to look at, and not only on energy savings is a hard savings that you could calculate the ROI, but there's a lot of soft savings that you have to understand to say, hey, our increased security and safety of our citizens in our city, there's value to that, but it's hard to see a hard dollar savings on that number when it relates to security and safety. So you have to look at the soft savings as well. The whens and whys to invest in a smart city platform. I'll get into this a little more deeper in a couple of the other slides coming up here. But there's certain things that you should understand before making that leap into a smart city platform. Is your city ready? Is your network ready for a smart city platform? Or are you going to pay for a robust software solution that you might not be able to use fully, or your network might not be able to support fully to get all the data sets that it would be looking to ingest? Understanding the pricing of smart city platforms is a very tough undertaking. It's not apples to apples. Vendors price some based on data usage, and that could be on megabits per second. Some might have a data cap on megabytes per month. Some might be on licensing on the user count. So the devil's always in the details. You have to look at the pricing models when you're comparing different solutions to try to understand if one vendor A to B, which one will actually cost you the most, because the pricing model is different. I've seen cities make mistakes here that are very costly. So beware and try to understand the pricing and do your research. So besides understanding some of the challenges of smart city platforms, what should a city look for in a vendor when they're in their initial phase of prospecting vendors that have smart city platforms. So I labeled out here bullet points here. Look at the comprehensiveness of the platform. Who do they partner with? What does their whole ecosystem entail? What can and can they not do? What can they connect to and not connect to? Can they handle every department within your city and the data that those departments bring in? Look at the subscription model. I just touched on that. The cost of the pricing, the apples to apples. It's usually not apples to apples. And then the vendor expertise. Is the smart city solution you're looking at, is their focus strictly on smart city platforms that they're offering? Or do they have a lot of other products and software that they mostly focus on, and this is just a recent addition? How many of the platforms have a city focus? I've seen some smart platforms that say they're smart city platforms, but they don't understand all the city departments, public safety and parks and recreation, to where they have customized predetermined templates that will be easier for cities to customize these dashboards. Some have that, some don't. So look which ones have a city focus. Functionality, their capabilities of the platform. This is usually easy to find. They usually market their functionality and what they can do. That's usually their strengths. In interoperability and integration, this is important when connecting to all your different departments that are natively siloed. And then scalability. Will this work for a city that has 40,000 residents? Will it also work for a city that has 5 million? So understand how it could scale and if it's can handle your capacity and your citizen population. Security. Security is very important, and mostly all the time it's overlooked. So always ask. They usually don't market what they do as far as securing the data that they ingest and telling you where the data resides. You hear the word single pane of glass, but where does the data actually reside? Is it on premise? Is it in a cloud? Is it a private cloud or a public cloud? So these are more questions that you could ask when you're looking for a smart city platform. The user experience is another important caveat, because if you get a smart city platform and it's very hard for your employees to use, they're not going to use it. So I always suggest to build a team that includes the end users that will be using the smart city platform. Their input is valuable on if it's user friendly for them, if they understand how to navigate through the platform and these dashboards, or even how to customize the dashboards. So their input is very valuable. Another caveat is there's a lot of cities that haven't completed the digital transformation. The digital transformation basically is looking at going from paper and pen and file cabinets to digital copies on computers and databases. So if you haven't completed the digital transformation, there's going to be a lot of information that you can't even get into a smart city platform. So here I labeled out what is entailed in a typical digital transformation. And I broke it down into the strategy and vision, the human talent, process and governance, and then technology and capabilities. On the next slide, I'll show you what smart city platforms focus on and why it's important for you to make it through the digital transformation journey. Because if you don't, these areas that smart city platforms focus on aren't going to fully function if you haven't completed the digital transformation. So in green here, you'll see the overlap and where the focus of a smart city platform resides. So obviously there's cost in a smart city platform, but what can a city recoup? What kind of revenue can it drive for a city if they had a smart city platform? This is broken down over here in the platform monetization column. There's a lot of advertising that they could do with with businesses within the city that could advertise on digital signage, on smart city app that's owned by the city. The data that you do collect, there's market research companies that sell data. A lot of times it could be outdated and not as valuable. You could give great data and sell this data to local businesses as well as national. Mobile offload for some of the mobile carriers, access subscription rates, and vertical asset leasing. There's a lot of areas that cities can monetize that can help offset the cost of smart technology, IoT, and smart city platforms. The left column shows a lot of the common smart city strategies and technologies that are being implemented. There's many more. I just listed a lot of the common ones there. But the main purpose is to be able to have access to data, the data secure, have quick access and share data to be able to respond to incidences and issues and failures throughout your city and throughout your city's network in a more timely fashion. And the smart city platform, it does a lot of monitoring. And there's a lot of software for individual applications that do monitoring, but smart city platform will do overall monitoring of all applications and all areas of a city and their network. So the importance of monitoring is you get a baseline and understand what's normal in your environment. Another critical aspect is you get to understand where all your assets are. You get an inventory of everything that is owned by the city and where it's at. It's important. A lot of cities sometimes struggle with understanding, hey, we know we have this vehicle or we have this device or we have this equipment, but we're not sure where it's at. Capacity. This comes into a lot of areas, not only within your network, but capacity with roadways, transportation, capacity within your utilities, sewer, water. If you're building a lot of new buildings in a particular area, can the sewer and water supply lines support the new infrastructure? Some of these smart city platforms will give you this insight in early for planning and development stages. Another caveat that I didn't mention here is you're hearing a lot about digital twins. So digital twins is another single pane of glass that will give you a lot of information, but it goes deeper to give you trying to give you real-time data and modeling in 2D and 3D. Back to the smart city reasons for monitoring growth so you could scale just ahead of demand. And trending. Trending is very important. You could recognize some problems and issues and bottlenecks before they happen and have a plan of action to remedy those issues. And then the 3 W's. Who, when, and where. This has been an important concept that cities have asked more so over the past year because of the pandemic. They didn't know where people were moving to. They wanted to know which buildings were being occupied and how many people were occupying them. And they didn't have a pulse on that. So cities are looking to gather more data so that they can understand their environment. So the who, when, and where has become very important as of late. But that is a lot of what I wanted to cover here with smart city platforms. If you do have any questions, we could address that in our upcoming panel, and we'll be glad to go over any of those other topics as well.
Thank you, Anthony. I'd asked you to stay on camera because we're going to have everybody get on camera now and go into our panel discussion. And you can stop sharing your screen so we can all show up in the middle here. I thought your presentation brought out a lot of good points, and it's a lot of the same stuff that we say too. Scalability being one of those. I think a lot of people get overwhelmed with smart city platform projects, and they think it has to be this, grand, overarching kind of white elephant thing, but you can really start small. You can start in a couple of application areas, kind of like we've seen with the city of Columbus here, or you can go big, like we've seen with QIC. And also, I think it's important to get that baseline, and the inventory is important too, if for no other reason than to develop a better cybersecurity strategy, right? We talked about that yesterday. It's hard to protect stuff if you don't know what you have out there. So that's another key benefit, but I'd like to move into the panel discussion now. Robert and Matt, would you care to say a couple of additional words about yourselves and what your companies do before we jump into that discussion? Why don't we start with Robert?
Sure, thanks, Larry. Robert Hylton from Transpara, and a little bit like Anthony's presentation. So we make sort of that system of systems, real-time visualization. We started by doing that in the industrial world, monitoring everything from nuclear power plants to the electrical grid to satellites and you name it, and doing that all in real time, doing that all in that single pane of glass and that mentality of not moving the data. So putting the data to use without a huge project to migrate it, move it around. So we're a software platform. We do that, and we've been doing that now for 15 years in 25 countries or so.
Thanks, Robert. Matt?
Yeah, so I'm with Fybr. We've been around since the late 90s. So as one of my colleagues likes to say, we've been doing IoT since before it was cool. We began with parking, and then about 10 years ago, we decided to completely overhaul our entire platform so that we could facilitate some of those other verticals that I talked about. So right now we obviously still have a smart parking solution, curbside management solution. We've created our own lighting controller, air quality monitors, water monitoring. We've even done industrial agricultural irrigation systems. So, what do all of those things have in common, and why is our platform unique? I think the main couple of things that make us different is we've developed an ultra low power, long range solution. So running everything off of batteries, which allows us to be infrastructure free. So we can put sensors into parking spaces. We can put those air quality monitors not at the top of a lighting pole, but at human level, or we can put sensors into a 1,000-acre farm field and still have it function reliably. So that's kind of what we do and where we excel today.
Thanks, Matt. I'm also envious of your Saturn V rocket model there behind you.
Oh, thanks.
Let's start with some questions here. In our research, we found that it's kind of tough to articulate the value proposition of smart city platforms to some people. I mean, what we've seen is a lot of end users tend to focus in silos. They tend to focus on deploying technologies into those very specific functional silos in cities. We, of course, are preaching this message of a holistic view of everything that's going on in a city. Of course, you don't have to start out a project that way, but that ultimately is the value, right? What happens in one system or silo is going to have an impact on what happens in another. And so having a holistic view of what's going on can really aid you in making your city run better and improve the lives of your citizens and so forth. I'm wondering if you could share any advice with us for our listeners here about how we can successfully, pitch these projects to senior level management. What can we do to convince senior level management that these solutions are worth adopting? How do we articulate the value proposition? Anthony, you talked a little bit about ROI, and Amber, I think you talked about some of your ROI on your project. What can we offer our attendees here to sort of take back with them as to why do we need this kind of thing, and how do we pitch this to senior level management?
I think it comes, every city is different, but unfortunately it takes major events to happen for them to see a need for something that they don't currently have or information that they don't currently collect. Unfortunately, we have a pandemic where if it takes a natural disaster, here in the US, you've heard about the big snowstorm and ice everywhere, taking out power. So when events like these happen, unfortunately, it's great marketing and starts the conversations on, yes, they know that they weren't prepared and had no data to understand what was actually happening and how to start action to help remediate issues and failures and problems within the city. And it could be on highways, it could be in buildings, it could be on the sidewalks, wherever. So even though the technology is here and it's been here, the platforms have been here, there has to be a culture change. And because they've been segmented or siloed in different departments and never knew to access information or asked every other department if they've procured a solution similar to what they're looking at. Even if you put the smart city platform in there and collect data, if people don't know how to use that or how to understand and digest all that data from all these other departments that could benefit them, it's like an old dog is still going to go back to its old habits. So unfortunately, I think the onus almost falls on manufacturers having to go above and beyond selling your solution, but to make that culture change and to say, hey, here's what we do, and here's how our platform or our technology and software can help you, but here's how you need to change what you're doing on a daily basis to reap that benefit or that gain.
Just to add to that, I think we've seen, having done this myself personally for 10 years, a decade ago, we were trying to sell cities on the concept of smart city infrastructure and the technologies and get them to actually believe they worked and were a viable solution. I think, in the last 2 years, we're beyond that. Most cities understand that this is, there are solutions that are robust, that are stable, that are solid and viable. Now the challenge is getting these municipalities to just figure out how it fits into their workflows. And, originally, again, 10 years ago, we were seeing the Seattles, the San Franciscos, the Washington, DCs, those top 20 markets were the primary cities that were the kind of the groundbreakers in doing some of the early pilots. Now it's, literally the neighborhood I live in is a municipality of 28,000 people, and we're putting in a parking solution for them in the next month. They have 2,000 parking spaces. None of those are paid, but they see value in bringing wayfinding, curbside management, and then doing essentially 24/7, 365 parking studies, to the municipality. And we're seeing more and more cities of that size adopting our solutions much quicker than the big cities, just because of the size of those cities. They're not siloed, so they can turn the ship much more quickly. And I think we're going to see that trend continue. Interestingly enough, we'll see probably more of the suburbs than the major cities adopting this technology quicker than some of the larger cities.
And Larry, I'd also add, having done a few hundred projects that all relate in the category, it's often important to start small, even though you have the vision in mind. And that's not just small in terms of the project, but small in terms of the perceived ROI, the perceived benefit, or the challenge you're trying to do. It could be a simple event-based task, like I need to do things remotely now just because of the pandemic or because of weather or something else. I'm not able to act the way I was. So that can be an instigator, or it can be something like I have a problem with downtime or revenue interruptions or anything else that might be your hot button, and really just target in and solve that particular problem, but always keeping on the concept that you can solve the greater problem, and this is the start of that journey. So just going in and saying, here's this completely holistic thing, and I'd like you to buy this entire thing for your entire city and for all departments, that'll always fail, because A, there isn't necessarily a person who makes that decision for everyone. Second, how do you go, that's just a huge thing to bite off. And so we see it, always starting small with the end in mind.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. We advise people to start small as well, maybe in one or two application areas and expand from there. I also agree with Anthony in that sometimes it takes a bit of a crisis to get people to realize the value of these types of technologies. And we have seen with COVID-19 that this has been a real catalyst as far as cities, increasing or adopting a new, digital transformation program because they're in the midst of trying to manage this pandemic and they need data from all these different sources and they don't have a good way to manage that data. So a lot of times they end up doing something like a custom Power BI implementation or something. And, I think these solutions get kind of unwieldy, right? Which is where smart city platforms come in because they're exactly built for this kind of thing. Let's talk about data because, obviously, smart city platforms involve taking data from all these different sources and different legacy systems and so forth, and trying to put them into a common environment, as we've been talking about that single pane of glass, right? But that single pane of glass relies on data that's coming from lots of different sources and different formats. And especially when you get to the OT level, right? With industrial controls and building automation systems and basically anything that's on the ground that's controlling physical processes, that produces a lot more challenges because you have a huge range of vendors. You have a huge range of different communication protocols. The problem just gets a lot harder. Can you tell us a little bit how you made the data management problem work for you? How do we, what do we look for, in smart city platforms as far as how to manage data effectively from all these different sources? Anybody feel free to jump in.
I can take it from our side.
Okay.
So the way our system works and always has worked is in not moving data, right? So that has been the key to everything we've done is say, you're going to have silos. They're going to exist. The people who own those silos are going to own and manage their data. How do you put it to use in a system of systems kind of way? So how do you make all that data look the same to the overlying system and use it in real time, let it move, let it be live without the second you move data or migrate it or take it into a new source of master data, you just added about 10x to any project, both the timeline, the cost, how fragile the system becomes, the moving parts, et cetera. So we've always taken this concept of saying, leave the data where it sits, put it to use, make that live. And then that can be through many different protocols and ways. And in our case, all we did was take the very least common denominator approach because of how long ago we started on this. It had to be crazy simple and crazy lightweight and fast. So we basically make all data sources look like time series databases to us, which means what we're actually transporting across the wire and how is close to zero. It's extremely lightweight, extremely fast, and never interrupts everybody else's on all those silos. So that's just a simple view of how we deal with data, and that kind of gives us access to thousands of sources and all the various protocols that are out there.
Anyone else care to comment?
I think one other challenge with data that we've seen is there's a number of companies that are doing the software component and doing the data aggregation. But where I still think most municipalities and most smart cities are lacking is in the real on-the-ground data from true sensors or from devices, which then leaves a lot of companies guessing on that information or using ancillary sources. We see in the mobility space, we see a lot of companies relying on smartphone data to try and figure out where people are moving and coming and going. And then they spend a ton of time, money, and resources on algorithms to predict what's really happening when they probably could have just put a sensor in to collect that information far more accurately, far more effectively, and far more cost effectively. That's just my 2 cents.
Thanks, Matt.
To
Anthony,
expand,
I know you probably have something to say about this.
To expand on what Robert and Matt have brought up, there's a lot of solutions out there on IoT and sensors and what radio frequency, what protocols that they're using, and there's pros and cons to a lot of these different competing wireless technologies. Some work better in certain environments than others. So there's a lot to understand, and that's another big ask, is to have a city or a department that's tasked with procuring a solution where they don't know the difference between, let's just say, LoRaWAN, Wi-Fi, Sigfox, and Wi-Sun. That those are like foreign languages to them. So I understand that it's a heavy lift for cities to be able to not only try to learn a new technology or a new sensor and how it could help their city, but deciding which protocol, which frequency is best for them. There's risk involved, obviously. And all I could say is that you're not going to find all the answers, and it's not going to be a quick education process. But do research and ask questions. Don't feel stupid to ask questions on things that you don't know. It can only help in the process.
And some of those ones you mentioned, Anthony, are some of the newer side there. We also deal with, some of these protocols that are 50 years old. When you go to the water department and they're, monitoring the tank levels or their reservoirs or something, you're often dealing with ages old SCADA systems and other things like that. You still need this modern front end that's real time on top of that stuff. And they're instrumented. They are the old version of IoT. It's the same thing. It's instrumented in real time, but you got to get a wide mixture of all these different speeds, different ways of communicating, all that same stuff. Again, goes back to that. How do you get it down to a place where they all look the same to your end result?
Well, and to the point of both of you, what protocol is chosen might be dependent on what the use case is.
Totally.
I think that 5G or versus LoRa or LoRaWAN, if you're in an industrial application or an agricultural application where you've got several hundred or thousand acres of wide open space versus an urban environment where you're putting a sensor under a car, that those use cases are radically different, and the demands you're putting on the infrastructure are going to change and be different. And even within a city, those use cases might change the needs, and there may not be one solution that fits all those needs optimally. So looking for that one answer to all of your questions and all of your problems is probably not necessarily going to happen. It's just a matter of finding what is the best choice that will work with your existing infrastructure and plan future infrastructure.
Thanks, Matt. Amber, we have a question for you. For the city of Columbus, what are the next projects on the forefront? So I'm sure you probably are interested in doing some other things. How do you plan on expanding your program from here?
Sure. So I'm just in parking services, so I can't speak to all of the projects going on in Columbus, but for parking in particular, over the next month, we're hoping to get an RFP out to work on our dynamic curb lane management. So our loading zones, taking some spaces, that street space that's really valuable for parking, and figuring out how we can best use it. Does it need to be changed to pick up drop-off zones? Should it be a loading zone? Right now, we just kind of open up loading zones for anyone who needs one. As long as we have the space for it, we'll put it in for you, and we end up with a lot of wasted parking space, which is becoming a very important commodity, especially in our busier areas of the city. So we're looking forward to that next big project that we're going to bring into the next year. So that's where we're at.
Thank you. Yeah, we look forward to that too. And hopefully you can come back next year and tell us about that. We have another question about visualization. So we've talked about this single pane of glass, right? But how you design that single pane of glass and what's in that single pane of glass and how much information the operator that's sitting behind that single pane of glass can digest. Those are all important variables. I'm wondering if you can offer us any words of wisdom on what we can do to create good user interfaces and dashboards. Anthony, you mentioned dashboards as well. What can we do to minimize the time it takes to create these and also design dashboards that are effective, that people can understand, and digest the information coming off the screen to make an actionable decision? You're on mute, Anthony.
I think that's a very good question, because that's a big problem with a lot of these encompassing smart city platforms. They can do so much, but it's almost too much information for each individual that needs a certain set of data that they're responsible for monitoring or looking at and seeing trends for. So platforms that are easier to customize and easier to set up users and authorizations is going to make the onboarding and the daily use of the platforms a lot easier. Several that I've used are not terribly easy. And you do spend a lot of time customizing them and making them look the way that you need them to. So imagine if you had to do that for each employee in a department, let alone a city. So I don't say there's an easy solution yet. I think software developers are seeing that the more that they could become, I don't like to mention companies, but like Apple, to make the ease of the use of a device or software that simple that even your grandparent can use it, we'll get a lot more buy-in, because the more technical and the more advanced and the harder it is to customize and to use daily, the harder it is going to be to sell that solution.
Oops, there's some additional challenges on top of this, and that just sheer scale. So, even in a smart meter implementation by itself, you might have 500,000 meters. You might have 10 different metrics on each meter. So you're already into a staggering number of things, and that's just in one use case, one silo, right? And so one of the things we focus on and have to focus on, and it goes exactly to what you said, Anthony. First of all, we have to take a consumer approach to user experience. We have to take all the leading applications that people would use, and in our case, we even do it on your phone. It has to be painfully obvious. It has to require zero or close to zero training. And then it has to do the work for you. And what I mean by that is when you're dealing with millions of things, no human can look at millions of things. You've already gotten to an impossible task. So that means the software has to surface those things that need your attention for you, even out of that giant haystack of millions of objects, millions of metrics that might be there. There might be in the form of larger metrics that are rolled up, but also even down at the beginning, each of those things has to raise its hand and say, hey, I need your attention. I might be 10 levels down in your hierarchy of information or more. I might be hidden away in normal course and speed, but I need to be able to not only notify you, and we have this statement that we basically say our belief is that the software needs to tell users when to pay attention. So it's not a case where somebody's going to sit like in a nuclear power plant and sit in front of a screen all day and monitor it and know what's happening. It has to tell you even when you're home or you're on the bus or wherever you are that, hey, something's gone out of expectation and it needs my attention, and let me surface it. So it has to be painfully obvious, has to use color and shape and everything else to just eliminate that need for training and eliminate that million object problem, because otherwise you've already failed.
Robert, you mentioned something there that I think is very critical that could easily be overlooked. Is you mentioned that you could relay the information of when to look and when to address a potential issue. Even after software solutions and smart technology and IoT solutions are implemented, dashboards are created, I can't tell you how many countless hours it has taken just with one city, sometimes hundreds, setting up the alerts and the thresholds on the alerts.
Right.
So I'd like to give Matt and Robert a chance to say how easy or how hard it is with your solutions for alerting and the monitoring process.
Yeah, alarms, and I'll just say a couple of words about that because I've done a lot of research on this on the manufacturing and industrial side. Alarm and alert management is an entirely separate discipline unto itself. There's actually an entire standard devoted to managing alarms and alerts from plants called ISA 18.2. But this is a critical issue, right? We're putting these new systems in. We're putting lots more information in the hands of different people that haven't had it before. How do we let people know what's an alert, what's an alarm, what's the critical stuff that needs to be acted upon right away? And that is how ISA 18 defines an alarm, as something that immediately requires operator action, right? It's an emergency, very important condition. So I'll leave that to the rest of you to comment on that, but this is a critical issue that we do need to address.
Yeah, and again, I think it depends on the use case. We began building end-to-end solutions, so everything from the sensor all the way to the dashboards and tools, just because 15 years ago that didn't exist as a service anyplace else. Today, with parking and transportation, we see kind of a twofold approach. We've migrated away from our proprietary dashboard and tool set to using Amazon QuickSight for our dashboarding, just because it's far more robust and far more scalable. And a lot of other cities are already using that, so they can incorporate it into their data sets more effectively. Or they can just grab our API feed and integrate it into their existing systems that they're currently using. With our lighting solution, we built our own proprietary lighting platform just because there wasn't anything out there off the shelf that could handle turning on lights, grouping lights, doing the management of every asset that sits on those poles, to issuing trouble tickets and doing an alert system that allows the cities to dispatch service workers and have them prioritize their workloads based off of the use cases. So in that case, we built our own solution that is not using QuickSight, but is a proprietary dashboard. So I think it really depends on the use case.
Yeah, and I would add it, use case and user and patterns. So back to the concept of there's too much information for a human to deal with, right? I'll make a few different distinctions. So Larry, the alarm level to us and alerts are two separate things, meaning an alarm is more that SCADA system level, low level with acknowledgements and follows those standards, where in our case, an alert or notification is based on a KPI threshold. And that can follow certain patterns. You wouldn't want to turn on alerts for every single KPI, certainly not in a smart meter type scenario like I discussed. You'd be flooded immediately with way too much. So what we do is a combination of, first of all, starting small, like we keep saying, pick those things that are the most important and the higher level things that you may want a notification on. Second, automate the patterns of the alerts so that you can, if you have a million things and you do want alerts, you first of all only want to do them in very extreme events to start with until you start to see those patterns. Second, you want escalating alerts. There may be somebody in the silo, let's call it, that does want an alert every time something happens. But if there's a more extreme version, how do you alert the next level up or a different set of people all the way up to, hey, this is a critical crisis level. Let me alert a lot of people all at once, some of those things. But then you have to, once you have these patterns, we have something called alert templates, which lets us set up that alerting scenario and then apply it to any subset of the information in a rapid way. So you don't have to sit there and manually do that. And then to Anthony's point, the last thing about how do you configure the thresholds, right? This is probably the most effort. This is the most time consuming thing in our space. Even though we're pretty rapid to deploy, it's still where you spend the most amount of time. And there's some ways to help with that. We have something called a target limit generator, which will go through and crawl the last N number of days that you want. So you could go look at the last 60 days and set a baseline targets for highs, double highs, triple highs, multiple levels automatically as just a starting point. Now, these won't be your final things, but you will have then populated the system and go back and tune, and you'll be able to start seeing your results without having to manually one by one say, here's how it goes. Then you can go find the exceptions and go adjust accordingly.
Thanks, Robert. I think we are approaching out of time here. It's almost 9:30 my time here in Mountain Time. I want to thank everybody for participating today. I thought we had some great presentations and some great participation on this panel discussion. We have to make room for the next session, which is going to be happening shortly. But again, I want to thank everybody. And if you want to continue this discussion, you can go to the ARC VFair site and go under networking, and we have several chat channels there. And one of them is for the Smart Cities Forum. We also have one on cybersecurity, and there's lots of ways you can interact and ask questions of people. I go in there periodically to check. So if there's any questions you didn't want to ask in this panel that you want to ask, you can ask those in the chat. And once again, I'd like to thank everybody for their time today. A lot of valuable insights and certainly, a lot of excellent knowledge that you've shared with everybody today. And I hope it was beneficial to everybody. And we hope we can see you next year. All right.
Thanks, Larry. No,
Thank
thanks
you, Larry.
from
Thanks.
Tibor, who's hopefully sleeping.
Yeah, please tell Tibor I said thank you as well. That was an excellent presentation. All right.
Great.
Goodbye, everybody. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.